Here he is.
The Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. No one else will take the call? I will. Sir, can I address firstly the issue of the government squeaking back into surplus? It is a good thing. It is a good thing. We agree that government books should be in surplus, and indeed the Labor Party produced our own financials at the time of the last election to show that we would have been in surplus this year too. There are a number of points that need to be made in respect of it, sir. They've been well made by Grant Robertson. To get to surplus this year, the government effectively used the ACC system as a source of taxation. It took more in ACC levies from registration fees and taxes on petrol and road user charges than it needed to fund ACC in order to construct a surplus. We also know, contrary to what the Minister of Finance said in his answers at question time today, that the tax cuts that the National Party implemented after the election in 2008, where they gave 40% of the income tax cuts to the top 10% of income earners, they most clearly increased income inequality in New Zealand. The Minister of Finance today at question time had the gall to pretend that it didn't. He said it reduced income inequality. That is a patent error and one which the Minister of Finance ought not to have made. Mr Speaker, I want to turn to the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. I agree it's a significant deal, and I want to record its history because it started under the Labor government with what was called the P4 Agreement, which involved New Zealand, Singapore, Chile, and I forget what the fourth country was. Mr Speaker, the Minister of Trade at the time was the Honourable Phil Goff. The Honourable Phil Goff had numerous meetings with Susan Schwab, who was the trade representative from the United States, and encouraged the Americans to join into the P4 process, which turned into the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. There have been some intemperate comments coming from the National Party in the last week. They have said they've tried to criticise Annette King and the Labor Party for asking questions that the opposition parties ought to be asking, which is, what is the underlying effect on things like Farmac? Now, we already know and accept that the Farmac model is not going to be fundamentally broken by the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, despite ambitions earlier in the process from some of the American interest groups to actually break up the Farmac model. And it's a good thing that Farmac has been protected but in its fundamental model. But it is important that New Zealanders transparently have answers from the government as to what will be the effect of changes directly or indirectly in respect to patent laws to the costs of Farmac. Now, it may well be that those questions satisfy the Labor Party. It may be that they don't. But it's absolutely our duty to ask those questions, and I thank Annette King for bringing those questions to the House. Mr Speaker, I want to say that some of the opposition that there is in civil society to the Trans-Pacific Partnership has been caused by the way Minister Grosser and the National Party have addressed these issues. Indeed, just yesterday, the New Zealand High Court found Minister Grosser's actions in refusing to provide public information to be a breach of the Official Information Act and quashed his decisions in a way which is quite unusual and said he had to make more disclosures to the civil society. And it is that somewhat arrogant approach which has caused some of the backlash against the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which does no credit to the National Party. Mr Speaker, other members in the National Party have said that somehow the Labor Party questioning aspects of the Trans-Pacific Partnership mean that we're opposed to free trade. That is not so. We are a party that is proudly in favour of free trade. We know that as a small nation at the bottom of the Pacific, we benefit from lower tariffs in respect of the countries to whom we sell goods, and of course the Trans-Pacific Partnership covers a very significant proportion of world economic output and trade. Mr Speaker, in the short time I've got left, I want to make one further reference, and that is I think the government has sold us out on the ability of future governments to control who buys New Zealand residential land. The government, the national government doesn't want to do that. Actually, the Chinese Free Trade Agreement allows us to control the sale of residential land to overseas people. It does, Mr Bennett. You are ignorant. You should read the agreement. It's been well published. Mr. Speaker, just because the national government doesn't think that that was appropriate doesn't mean they should have argued for the freedom for New Zealand, as experienced in Australia, Vietnam and various other countries.
Member's time has expired.
Done.
Melissa Lee.
Thank you very much, Speaker.